It isn't easy to read a book like the Bible literally because it's full of literal contradictions. And whatever it is, especially the really archaic stories in Genesis, whatever it is, it's not history the way we think of history. And so that's hard for people. It's hard for people to see how that might still be true. If it's not literal, how can it be true? And this is a discussion that I tried to have with Sam Harris a lot, because the atheist types, the rationalist types, there's something they miss, and what they miss is that fiction isn't false. It's not a lie, right? It's not literal, but it's not a lie. And great fiction is true, but it never happened. So how can it be true? And the answer to that is something like, well, there are patterns in things, deep patterns, deep recurring patterns. You know, human nature, the fact that we're human, that the humanity itself is a recurring pattern. It has characteristic shape, and great fiction describes the shape of that pattern. And the greatest of fiction, the greater fiction becomes, the more it is religious in nature. And that's not even a claim about the nature of truth. It's more a claim about the nature of experience. You know, when we say something is profound, what we mean is that it's moving and that it has a broad influence. It's capable of having a broad influence on the way we think and see and act. So if you read a profound book, like one of Dostoevsky's books, you could say of that book, and people often do, that it changed my life when I read that book. And a story that can change your life has a power that is best described as religious. And so religious is a kind of experience in some sense, rather, in addition to a claim about what constitutes truth. And then those stories in Genesis, Cain and Abel, I think, and the story of Adam and Eve, because those stories are so deep that it's almost unfathomable, they get at the most profound of patterns. And so to say that they're literally true is actually to massively underestimate how true they are. Because you could tell me what you did this morning, and that would be literally true, but like, who cares? Whereas if you read the story of Adam and Eve, it's so true that it applies to everyone always. And mere literal truth can't do that. And we don't have a good language as scientists, let's say, as psychologists, or even as citizens. We don't have a good language for that kind of truth. There's 4 sources in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. 4 stories that we know came together. One was called the priestly. There's a source called the priestly, and it used the name Elohim or El Shaddai for God. And I believe El is the root word for Ella as well. And that's usually translated as God or the gods, because Elohim is utilized as plural in the beginning books of the Bible. And it's newer than the Yahweh's version. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because Genesis 1, which is the first story, isn't as old as Genesis 2. Genesis 2 contains, the Yahweh's version contains the story, for example, of Adam and Eve. And that's older than the very first book in the Bible. But they decided to put the newer version first. And well, it isn't, and I think it's because it deals with more fundamental abstractions. It's something like that. It's like it deals with the most basic of abstractions, how the universe was created, and then segues into what the human environment is like. And so that seems to be the logic behind it. The Yahweh's version uses the name YHWH, which apparently people didn't say, but we believe was pronounced something like Yahweh. It has a strongly anthropomorphic God, so one that takes human form. It begins with Genesis 2:4. This is the account of the heavens and the earth, wind, and contains the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah and the Tower of Babel and Exodus and Numbers, along with the priestly version. It also contains the law in the form, just the form of the 10 Commandments, which is like a truncated form of the law. There's the Elohist source. It contains the stories of Abraham and Isaac. It's concerned with a heavenly hierarchy that includes angels. It talks about the departure from Egypt, and it presents the covenant code, which is this idea of that society is predicated. This was Israeli society, was predicated on a covenant with God, and that's laid out in a sequence of rules, some of which are the 10 Commandments, but many of which are much more extensive than that.
And then the final one is the Deuteronomist Code, and it contains the bulk of the law and what's called the Deuteronomic history, and it's independent of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And so we know that at least now there's debate about this like there is about everything, so I'm brushing over a very large area of scholarship, but people generally assume that there were multiple authors over multiple periods of time, and the way they've concluded that is by looking at textual analysis, trying to see where there are chunks of the stories that have the same kind of style or the same reference. And people argue about that because, obviously it's difficult to recreate something ancient, but that's the basic idea. So it is an amalgam of viewpoints about these initial issues, and that's important to know. So it's like it's a collective story.